I used to think sharing was a lesson you taught in the moment. You see a toy being grabbed, you step in quickly and say something like, "Be kind, take turns." I believed that if I was consistent enough, present for every conflict and steady in every correction, the message would eventually become part of how my child moved through the world. I was wrong about where sharing actually starts. A few years ago, while researching European family rituals for this channel, I kept arriving at the same quiet finding. Italian children raised in multi-generational homes, where a grandmother was still genuinely central to daily family life, moved through shared spaces differently by age 4 or 5. They had a natural ease with waiting, a quieter relationship with fairness. It wasn't about more correction or more careful explanation. It came from something that happened at every single meal, before anyone at the table had lifted a fork. There's a tradition that sociologists at the University of Bologna have written about. It is so completely embedded in Italian family culture that most grandmothers who practice it have never given it a name. They simply do it. Researchers have come to call it La Nonna rule, and it works like this. When a grandmother serves a meal, the youngest child at the table is always served last, and never the largest portion. If that sounds backwards to you, I understand. My first reaction was exactly the same. In most Western households, particularly American ones, we protect the youngest instinctively. We serve them first. We make sure their portion is generous. We anticipate their discomfort before it arrives. And then at the playground or at a birthday party, we find ourselves managing a child who cannot wait, cannot share, and has genuinely never had much practice doing either. By the time I had read through the research and spoken at length with Italian parents and a developmental psychologist who has spent a decade on precisely this question, something had shifted in how I think about serving dinner. What makes La Nonna rule work is not a cultural quirk. It is a specific psychological mechanism that produces something explicit parenting instruction cannot replicate. The research I keep returning to began as a longitudinal study at the University of Bologna. Researchers were tracking preschool children across different family structures over 3 years, initially interested in the effects of multi-generational living on early cognitive development, nothing to do with sharing or patience. But what emerged across dozens of families and hundreds of observations was a correlation the team had not designed for. Children living in homes where a grandmother was a central mealtime figure scored significantly higher by age 5 on 2 specific developmental markers. The first was delayed gratification, the measured ability to wait for something desired. The second, which surprised the researchers far more, was prosocial awareness, the spontaneous, unprompted recognition of others' needs in a shared situation. These children were calmer about waiting, but they also seemed to notice other people differently, holding awareness of other hungers alongside their own. The team traced the pattern back to meal service. They asked grandmothers to describe what they did at mealtimes, and La Nonna rule surfaced, not as something the grandmothers could name as a rule, but as a consistent practice stable across families and regions and generations. They weren't looking for it. They found it embedded in the description of an ordinary Tuesday evening. What made the finding important was the mechanism, not only the outcome. These children were not being taught. They were watching someone they adored perform a specific, structured act at every single meal. The grandmother knew who was youngest. She remembered without being reminded. And across years of evenings, the youngest child watched her remember. La Nonna rule is not a lesson, it's a demonstration, and that distinction matters more than it might first seem. Developmental psychology has long distinguished between prescriptive modeling and descriptive modeling. Prescriptive modeling is when you tell a child how to behave, be patient, take turns. Descriptive modeling is when a child observes someone they love actually behaving that way, consistently, in a context that feels warm and ordinary. The evidence on which form produces more durable early moral development is not ambiguous. Descriptive modeling wins, particularly in the years before a child has the cognitive architecture to fully process explicit instruction. But La Nonna rule goes further than modeling behavior. It embeds behavior in ritual, and ritual is something categorically different from habit or modeling alone. A habit is something one person repeats. A ritual is something a family performs together, a repeated act that carries meaning beyond its surface function. Rituals don't need explanation or enforcement. They simply happen, night after night, until they become part of the emotional architecture of childhood. What La Nonna rule installs, across hundreds of repetitions, is a pre-verbal understanding of sequence and belonging, absorbed rather than explained. Here's what genuinely stopped me when I first read it. You would expect that a child who is always last, who always receives the smaller portion, would feel left out, possibly diminished, resentful over time. But the Bologna researchers found something almost precisely contrary to that intuition. The children who experienced La Nonna rule most consistently showed the highest sense of family belonging by age 6, not the lowest, higher than children who were served first, higher than children who received the most. I sat with that for a long time before I found an explanation that felt adequate. It came not from developmental psychology, but from social anthropology. There's a concept called ritual inclusion, the idea that being incorporated into the sequence of a meaningful group ritual, even at the end of that sequence, is a powerful signal of membership. The grandmother doesn't skip the youngest. She knows exactly where they belong in the order. She has always known. And the youngest child, at a level that exists long before language, absorbs this. I am part of this. The family knows where I am. What the child is not learning is that their needs don't matter. They are learning that needs are met, just not always immediately or first. That experience, repeated across the ordinary evenings of early childhood, quietly builds what researchers call internalized delay tolerance, something experienced in the body at the dinner table rather than enforced or explained. What's most surprising to me, even now, is how silent the whole thing is. I spoke with an Italian mother in Turin who grew up with La Nonna rule from her earliest memories. I asked what her grandmother said when she served the meals, whether she named the tradition or explained anything at all. She paused for a long moment. Then she said, "Nothing. She just served. No commentary, no explanation, just the act itself, quiet, warm, and unchanged across every evening of a childhood." There's one finding from the Bologna follow-up study I want to share before we go further, because it surprised even the researchers who had been tracking this for years. When the team revisited these same families 2 years after the initial study, they found that the children who had lived inside La Nonna rule had developed something the original study hadn't measured at all, a generalization of the ritual beyond the dinner table itself. But to understand why that happened, and why it doesn't happen when parents simply try to replicate the serving order as a strategy, you need to understand what the ritual is actually transmitting. And it's not what most people assume. Most people, when they first hear about La Nonna rule, assume the benefit comes from the waiting itself, that the repeated exercise in delayed gratification is the complete story. But the evidence points to something more layered than that. The Bologna researchers describe what they call social embedding. The child is not learning to wait in isolation, as an abstract exercise in self-control. They are learning to wait as a member of a family that moves together in a particular way. The fairness is not abstract. It is personal. It is woven into the face and the unhurried presence of someone who loves them entirely. This distinction matters because it is precisely what separates La Nonna rule from simply making a child wait for their food. A child told to wait while a distracted parent finishes a phone call is learning something entirely different from a child watching a grandmother serve others first with warmth and certainty. One is deprivation, the other is sequence. And the child's nervous system, even at age 3, knows the difference, even if the child cannot say so. Do you actually need a grandmother for this to work? You don't. What you need is someone the child trusts, a warm context, and repetition across time. The Italian grandmother is powerful not because of her age or formal authority, but because of her consistency and her calm. The child associates her with safety and love, and the ritual occurs at the meal, which is already among the most emotionally resonant anchors in a young child's daily life. You can be that person, and the specific mechanics, youngest last, smallest portion, don't need to be replicated exactly. What the research points to is the underlying structure. Someone the child loves putting others before themselves, without anxiety or drama, as part of the ordinary rhythm of sitting down together. Picture a weekday dinner. Everyone is hungry. Your youngest is 3, already reaching toward the table before you've finished plating. The path of least friction is to hand her plate to her first. What La Nonna rule suggests instead is quieter than it sounds. Plate the adults first, then the older children, then your youngest. The whole process takes perhaps 30 to 40 seconds longer, but in those seconds, your 3-year-old is watching the sequence unfold. She is not yet distressed, she is observing, and what her nervous system is slowly beginning to encode is, things happen in an order. My turn is coming. Do this across 2 or 3 years without explanation, as the natural shape of how your family eats, and you have given her something far more durable than any conversation about fairness could provide. Now, the generalization finding. The thing that surprised the researchers and that, for me, closed the circle on why this tradition has persisted through generations of Italian family life. 2 years after the initial study, the children who had lived inside La Nonna rule were showing measurably more prosocial behavior beyond the dinner table, in peer settings at school and on playgrounds. Without prompting, they waited for others to go first more often. They divided shared resources more fairly. They noticed when someone had been left out. The dinner table had become a template for the world. The sequence of the meal had become a way of reading a room. One observational detail from the Bologna field notes has genuinely stayed with me. The grandmothers who served this way were described almost universally as unhurried, not slow in a labored sense, just unhurried, as if the sequence of serving had all the time it needed. And the researchers noted that the children at the table were tracking this quality, the calm of the person serving, as much as they were tracking the sequence itself. What we transmit to young children is rarely the content of what we do. It is the emotional register with which we do it. A parent who serves in order but looks anxious about the youngest child's reaction is communicating something quite different from a grandmother who serves in order and looks entirely at peace with what she is doing. Your face, in that moment, is doing more teaching than any words you've ever said about sharing. Here's the position I want to name plainly, knowing it will divide people. I think we have turned protecting children from discomfort into something close to a moral project, and I think this project has cost us something real. A child who has only ever been first, whose hunger was always the first hunger addressed, has not been protected from difficulty. They have simply not encountered it yet in a context safe enough to learn from, and when they do encounter it, on a playground or in a classroom, the reaction is frequently larger than the situation calls for. Nothing in their experience has taught them, quietly and repeatedly, that last is survivable, that waiting is manageable. The Italian grandmother, in being warm and firm simultaneously, is expressing a confidence in the child that a great deal of modern parenting advice forgets to include. She is saying, without any words at all, "You are capable of this." What strikes me about La Nonna rule, looked at whole, is what it quietly assumes about the youngest child. Not a fragile thing to be shielded from every moment of discomfort, but a member of the family with a real place in the sequence, resilient enough to be last and to know, without being told, that last is loved. Children tend to grow into what we genuinely believe them capable of, and the grandmother's unhurried certainty is, in its way, the deepest expression of faith in a child she loves completely. I want to ask you something I'm genuinely curious about. When your child is last, when they have to watch someone else receive their plate first, what does your face do? Do you rush to reassure them before they've had a chance to feel anything? Or do you stay calm, let the moment be what it is, and quietly trust them to be fine? That is the hidden variable in La Nonna rule. It is not the serving order. It is the certainty of the person doing the serving, the grandmother's complete absence of anxiety about the situation. The child reads that calm and concludes, somewhere below conscious thought, "This is fine. I am fine." If you try something like this, even just one evening, I'd genuinely love to know what you noticed. Leave a comment below, even a single word. The conversations this topic opens up are always among the most thoughtful I get to read here. La Nonna rule is not a parenting strategy. It is a philosophy expressed through the entirely ordinary act of serving pasta. It says, "You belong here, you will be cared for." A child who absorbs this across hundreds of evenings, in warmth and without a single word of explanation, carries a different understanding of fairness into the playground and eventually into the world. Tonight, if you share a meal with your family, try something small. Serve yourself first, or serve your oldest child first. Stay calm. Let your youngest watch. Say nothing. Move through it as if it has always been this way. Then notice what happens, not just in your child, but in the whole room. And if you want to go further into the European family traditions that quietly shape emotionally resilient children, the French idea of le cadre, the Italian rhythm of la passeggiata, the Nordic gift of friluftsliv, there's a full series here, and new research every 2 weeks. Subscribe if this is the kind of slow, evidence-based parenting content you're looking for. See you in the next one.